This presentation provides an overview of the Breaking Bread project. The guidelines document for this project is also available on Husky CT along with individual submission links as well as prompts for each submission. But I like to provide a video overview for those who find it easier to understand a project when you listen to somebody explain it versus just simply reading it. Before I get started on the specifics of the project, I wanted to mention that some students in previous semesters, get into the semester and they express apprehension about this project. And I know that it can be kind of scary to meet new people and to interact with them, especially when you're being forced to do so. And you might be fearful of awkward interactions and things like that. And that's completely normal to be concerned about that. And it's also completely normal to experience that in these types of situations. But the goal here is for you to get that experience and to apply what we're talking about in class to help explain that experience. So if things are a little rough to begin, that's okay. I definitely don't want that to discourage you from continuing to participate in the project, and I certainly don't want it to prevent you from staying enrolled in the course. So if you have any concerns or you have some questions, definitely feel free to reach out. Without further ado, let's get into what the project entails. So I'll start with just a quick overview of the project. We know that research in interpersonal communication has continued to show that reciprocal self-disclosure is the primary mechanism through which relationships develop. Self-disclosure does a number of things, including it helps to reduce uncertainty about others, it helps us to develop intimacy with others, and it allows us to kind of build or strengthen that connection that we have with other people. We also know that sharing a meal is central to many relationships and traditions, and it's something that spans cultural bounds. For example, many families gather nightly for dinners or set aside specific times to get together as a family and eat, right? When you go on a date with someone, often where you go is to a restaurant, and certainly the formality of the restaurant or the meal might change, but you're often sharing something, whether it's a full meal, a dessert, coffee, whatever it is. Friends also often meet to catch up over brunch or lunch, and in many cases, these large extravagant meals are at the center of many holiday traditions. I know that is something that's really important in my family. So, in short, many of our interactions occur while breaking bread or sharing a meal with others. So, the goal of the project is to essentially get to know some of your classmates while quote unquote breaking bread with them. Now, when I first conceptualized this project, all students were taking the course in person, so they were required to share meals for all meetings, and everything had to be conducted in person. Obviously, you all are enrolled in an online asynchronous course, and you might be kind of spread out geographically, so you are not required to meet in person, nor are you required to eat, since I know that eating on camera can be awkward. I essentially want you to prioritize meeting with your group and having a conversation with them, right? So, in the next couple of weeks, once enrollment is finalized and we've moved past that add drop date, we will assign you to a group of 3 or maybe 4, depending on final numbers. And I'll elaborate that on the next slide. So, how will we assign groups? We are going to ask everyone in the course to complete a Breaking Bread preferences survey, which will ask you some questions about whether you want to meet in person or online, and whether you want to meet with a group, whether you want to meet with a group who plans to eat or would rather not eat during the meetings. And we will then communicate your group members to you, and then you will get in touch with those group members and set up your first meeting. So usually what happens is somebody takes the lead and initiates that first interaction to put a meeting on the calendar and sort through logistics. That Breaking Bread Preferences survey is due by 11:59 p.m. on the Tuesday of week 3, which is the day after the ad drop period. So that's why that due date is a bit different than some of the others. We do ask that you try to be flexible if your group members' circumstances change. So, for example, if you're placed in a group that plans to meet in person, but one of the members is no longer able to do so for whatever reason, or if you have a group member who maybe needs to temporarily move a meeting online, but can potentially go back to in person for a later meeting. Try your best to be as understanding as you can and try to be as flexible as you can. I understand that there are some limits to flexibility, of course, so I'm just asking that you try your best there. The logistics for each of these meetings that I'm going to explain here in just a second are largely up to the group members, but what you submit for credit following each meeting changes. So for meetings 1 and 2, you are going to submit a paragraph explaining just the basics of your meeting with your group, and your impressions of that experience, and then a photo of the group with a timestamp. Each group member's face should be visible in the photo. If you're meeting in person, then you can have the person with, I guess, the longest arms take a selfie of the group. Or, you can ask somebody in that immediate area to take a photo for you all. If you're meeting online, you can just take a screenshot. So that's the case for meetings 1 and 2. For meeting 3, nothing about the meeting itself changes, but after that third meeting, you're going to write a reflection about your experience across all 3 meetings. So this is obviously a more detailed response than those first 2 paragraphs that you submit after those first 2 meetings. Prompts for these are provided for all 3 submissions, so you can take a look at that information on Husky CT. Now, there are 3 primary stipulations for your meetings. The first is that you must meet with your group for at least an hour for each of the 3 meetings. That should be plenty of time to get situated, make your way through the pleasantries, and then really have a good discussion. Secondly, you should not bunch your meetings. So this means that you should not try to meet all 3 times at the beginning of the semester, nor should you meet twice between due dates, right, for 2 meetings. The idea is to kind of gradually get to know one another over the course of these 3 meetings, and so doing them all at once is not really consistent with the spirit of the project. And then third, make sure to use relevant course material, specifically from course lectures, in all 3 of your submissions. And that is noted in detail in the actual guidelines document as well. Let's talk about some additional meeting guidelines so that we're all on the same page and everyone's on the right track. So I mentioned before that you do not have to share a meal during your meetings, but of course you're encouraged to do so. If that's not feasible, I still encourage you to be as creative as you can with that time, which might also help the conversation progress and potentially avoid that initial feeling of awkwardness. So, for example, you could each agree to share a favorite recipe, or maybe everybody plans to wear a shirt featuring your favorite musical artist or something to that effect. You could create your meetings around a certain theme, or something like that if you're having a hard time coming up with things to talk about or to keep the conversation going. Secondly, if you are meeting online, you are welcome to choose your platform, but there are, again, 2 primary stipulations here. The first is that the platform must have both audio and video capabilities, and you should leave your camera on for the meeting. If you don't have a device with a functional camera, you can borrow one from the library. You can borrow a device, or you can borrow a webcam from the library. And if you're having any issues with that, you should just reach out and let us know and we can help you set that up. And then secondly, the platform that you choose should be one that encourages conversation. So I had a group one semester that played video games during their meetings, and they talked while they were doing that. So they had those headsets on or whatever. To put it simply, that really, again, doesn't capture the spirit of the project. So you need to choose a platform where you can talk to one another without too much distraction. So, kind of like we're trying to mimic or simulate an in person interaction, even if you're not meeting in person. It is also the group's responsibility to determine when to meet, but you should obviously try to account for everyone's preferences. And there are two important notes related to this. If the group sets a date and a member cancels, or something happens and they can't make it, ideally you would try to reschedule, um, as long as you have enough time to do so before the deadline. But I know that's not always possible, especially if the deadline is closing in, or if the group member didn't communicate in a timely manner, or if you have other things that you need to do and you just literally don't have additional time to meet. So um, you have a couple of options here. So you can try to reschedule, or you can just proceed as you already planned, and then that group member can catch up with you all during the next meeting. That group member is also free to reach out to the instructors and see if there's anything that can be done depending on the circumstance. Second, if a group member fails to respond to multiple attempts to connect, or if they agree to a meeting but then don't show up, they won't earn credit for that meeting, but that does not affect the other group members. So you don't necessarily need to worry if you're in a group of 3 and one person doesn't show up. You meet with the other person, you submit your paragraph, and we call it a day. So, while this project is a group endeavor in that you're meeting in a small group, each student is responsible for their own behavior and their own work. So your grade is not dependent on anyone else. Um, I want to acknowledge, of course, that group members who are not very collaborative can kind of ruin the experience for others. If someone's behavior is really problematic, you should tell us right away. Otherwise, you can put it in your reflection, right? So use course material to try to make sense of their actions and how you feel about it and how it has impacted the group dynamics. Ideally, we don't want to make changes to the groups once we've assigned them, because each person, again, should be responsible for their own decisions and actions, but certainly reach out if you have some concerns, or feel uncomfortable or unable to be in a group with another person. Unfortunately, a few semesters ago, I had to add this policy in front of you. And this policy came on the heels of two totally separate incidents. And I do not anticipate these being issues this semester because they aren't representative of how this project typically goes. But I want to articulate this very clearly just so there's no confusion. If you fail to communicate with your group members about scheduling meetings, and then they proceed to schedule the meetings without you, you should not harass them about rescheduling or meeting with you separately, nor should you try to coerce them to give you information about the meeting so that you can pretend like you were there and get credit for the submission. So, this happened in a previous semester. A student didn't attend the meetings and then asked the other group members what the group talked about so that that student could write the reflections as if they were actually there. The group members did give the student the information requested as a way to kind of dare them to try to pass it off as if, they'd been present, and it obviously did not work. I had another student in a totally separate semester who missed a meeting and then sort of texted and called the other group members multiple times and essentially tried to bribe them to get them to comply. And this was also not successful. So just don't do things like that, for a few reasons. The first is that they're both examples of academic misconduct. But if you engage in these kinds of behaviors, you're going to put a bunch of people in an uncomfortable situation. So again, I'm just asking that you please don't do anything like this. Not that I expect anyone to, but just in case it crosses your mind, um, try to avoid any problematic behaviors. All right, I wanted to take a minute to clarify exactly what you should be submitting for each of the meetings. So let's talk about that for a second. Following meetings 1 and 2, each individual group member should submit a photo or screenshot of your gathering with all members visible, and if you can, a date and time stamp of the meeting. You should also submit a short paragraph using at least one course concept, talking about what you discussed during your meeting and your overall impressions of the group. Um, you'll want to make sure to include the start and end time of the meeting in your paragraph as well. And those submissions are due on Husky CT by 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time by the dates listed on the course schedule. Please remember that we accept Word documents and PDFs. We do not accept Pages documents. We don't accept documents linked to a OneDrive or a Google Drive. And we don't accept documents submitted via email. All of those will receive a 0, and if you want to earn credit for them, you'd have to use a token to revise and resubmit so that you're following the instructions. The details for what to include in these paragraph submissions are, again, explained in the guidelines document on Husky CT. Now for meeting 3, this is slightly different. So each group member should submit a photo or screenshot of the gathering with, again, members visible and a date and time stamp. But this time you're going to submit a final reflection paper where you'll use more than one relevant course concept to discuss your experience across all 3 of those meetings. There is a list of 12 items to include in this reflection in the guidelines document. So make sure you review that so you know what it is that we want you to write about. This is due on Husky CT by the date listed on the course schedule. So this is due toward the end of this semester. And same thing here, make sure you are submitting your document in the appropriate format. Students always ask how long this submission needs to be. And I usually don't like giving page limits just because some students write more efficiently, some need more space. But I would say about 3 pages. I would recommend not going too far beyond 3 pages, but 3 pages is sufficient enough for you to address all of the things that you'll need to address in that final reflection to earn credit. I have a few more considerations to review, and then I will let you go. First of all, keep the capabilities of your group members in mind. Capabilities and maybe limitations as well. So some students are not going to be on campus. Some students probably have jobs and extracurricular activities that can make scheduling very difficult. Other students might live in certain environments where they're not able to schedule a meeting at a particular time. So, and some people might just be in different time zones. So do your best to navigate those challenges if they arise. And if you need assistance, we can certainly help you with that. But do try to be kind of understanding and respectful of everyone's unique situation. Secondly, make sure to respect any relevant policies for appropriate behavior. UConn has policies related to student conduct, and they apply, I believe, both on campus and off campus. So don't get yourself in trouble while participating in this project, and make sure to also respect the preferences of your group members. So, I think if you try to keep things PG-13, you'll probably be fine. But we just want to make sure that you are, again, not getting yourself in trouble either with UConn or any other establishment. And on that note, in addition to respecting UConn policies, make sure you respect any additional laws, guidelines, policies of whatever establishments you may or may not be hanging out in. And I always recommend planning in advance. If you plan in advance, that gives you more flexibility to make adjustments if necessary. It also gives you more time to communicate with us if a problem arises, and we then are better suited to help you navigate that situation in an appropriate and timely manner. And of course, I encourage everyone to be open to the experience, to be creative, and to just generally have fun, even though this is something that you're doing for a course. And then just one final note, please, I want you to have fun, but I also want you to take this project seriously. Your group members will likely hold you accountable just by the nature of what they share in their reflections. Um, so make sure that you are putting forth the effort to show up and to make a positive impression and to engage with your classmates and to get to know them and just have a generally positive experience. And of course, if you do violate any standards for appropriate academic or interpersonal conduct, there will be consequences related to your grade and likely consequences related to notifying community standards depending on the severity of the situation. So, again, I'm sure none of these things are going to happen, and we're all going to have a pleasant experience and end the semester on a positive note. So, if you have any questions, let us know.